Welcome to the fifth pilot episode of DABEL Tech Talks. I have a special guest with me today, Greg Taffet. We'll get into that in a minute, but first let me just introduce myself. My name is Dale Bondanza. I own a company by the name of DAB Enterprises, LLC. Our mission here at DABEL is to help companies obtain the next tier of success despite the forces set against them through a passionate focus on people, process, and technology. In that order, don't get it wrong. If you need help evolving your organization or your company to the next level, give us a call today. We can help. If there's anything we can't help with, I have plenty of friends. With that, let me tee up our guest today. So on the fifth episode today, we have our special guest, Greg Taffet. Greg is a fractional CIO, similar to the work that I've talked about in the past that I do as well. He works with clients all over the world. He mentors startup companies. He sits on the board of for-profit and nonprofit companies. And he's also very passionate about the blue economy. And I look forward to hearing more about that kind of towards the end of our presentation today. But Greg actually does coral reef restoration. The topics for today, we're going to talk about the CIO's role in helping companies grow and scale. We're also going to talk about what it means to be a fractional CIO and Greg's work as a board member and an advisor with companies all over the world. We're going to talk about his ability to help startups as a mentor, and also a couple of the organizations that, matter of fact, Greg and I are both involved in, which is the CIO Council of South Florida, or of Florida. I forget the title. I'll let Greg correct me. And then lastly, we'll get into one of Greg's passion areas, which is coral reef restoration. And again, I think you'll find some interesting tidbits there as well. So with that, anything I missed, Greg?
No, and good morning, and thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. Thank you for coming on. I'll stop the slideshow and get us right into our conversation.
Excellent.
So the CIO's role, Chief Information Officer, for those who may not know, what is the person who's responsible for all of the technology in the organization? What's their role in helping companies grow and scale, whether that's, as I kind of just said, to get to that next tier of success, or if the ultimate goal is even maybe selling the company?
It all depends on the company, but scaling the company, helping it grow, helping it compete, is some of the challenges that we have to work with. In some companies that are small, scaling and growing is, a primary concern. In some of the more mature companies that I work with, it's how do we have incremental improvement, or how do we have better processes or people, procedures, not just the technology. Sometimes, we even have to remove some technology as it becomes a anchor, in a crutch, to some people. And we need to look at that and say, what is it really going to do to the company to help make everybody more productive? And in some cases, we look at it to say, what is going to make the company more productive and not just the people? Because sometimes we're at a stage now where we're doing much more data analysis, much more collection of data. And so sometimes that actually gives more work to some people. It doesn't make less work, because now their job is much more detail oriented than it was before. And they have to collect a lot more detail and be a lot more analytical than they ever had to be in the past.
Okay. So one of the things you kind of you embedded in there, you didn't use the techie word, which is funny, technical debt. I think that's kind of what you were referring to, right? As far as stuff that sometimes you just got to get rid of.
Right. One of the real nice things about working with startups is there is no technical debt. But
good point.
you get a green field to be able to, take whatever is the most appropriate technology, most appropriate process, and apply it to the company. But in some of the older companies, I go into and I see that they started with a whole lot of personal productivity tools that they have now outgrown, and now they need to replace those tools with some systems. The personal productivity tools are not really integrated, and therefore you have a whole lot of extra effort and a whole lot of drag on the organization to integrate or communicate that information from department to department, and you get lots of siloed data, and lots of siloed processes. And many times it's necessary to go in there and just reorganize things into a corporate system instead of departmental systems.
I was just going to say it, and I didn't want to interrupt, but can you give a couple examples of that? Because I think I know that resonates with me as an IT person, but for anybody that's not IT that might be listening to this podcast, I think I know what you're saying as far as these personal systems that started way back when, and to your point, now they've kind of become a crutch because they're either not integrated, or if they are, it's pounding a square peg into a round hole kind of thing.
Well, two good examples are, lots of companies use Excel, and
Sure.
Excel gets developed by some smart person in the organization as his own personal productivity tool. And
Yeah.
then 2 or 3 people in the department say, wow, Jim, that departmental tool that you built is fantastic. Can I start using it? Now you have 5 or 6 people all keeping their own individual data in Excel. And when somebody wants to do a report for the company, they've got to go figure out where all these Excel spreadsheets are and consolidate them into a system, of a report. Now, in this case, maybe sometimes we look at, maybe we should be replacing those Excel spreadsheets with an ERP system. Now, the other side is you see a lot of salespeople all keep all their contacts in Outlook. And when they want to do a mailing or they want to contact or put notes in, they keep all their stuff in their own personal copy of Outlook. After you get a bunch of salespeople and you want to start doing analytics and tracking your pipeline and everything else, it's time to take those contacts out of Outlook and put them into a CRM system. And I think those are 2 examples that I come across all the time.
That's so perfect. Matter of fact, so I want to run with those. And either one is a good example. What's either your recommendation or your process when you run into something like that? Again, maybe take the sales example. Hey, I'm storing all my contacts in Outlook. I have a sales force of 20 people, and and there's so many things that should be embedded in the thinking of that, depending on the audience that's watching today. If you're the COO, or if you're the head of marketing or the head of sales, at any time, if any of these salespeople leave, you're also risking them taking your contacts, which your company owns, with them, or losing it altogether if it's not in a more centralized format. So how do you usually help organizations fix that situation?
Well, normally you have to have, and change management has become extremely sophisticated at this point, that people realize that you can't just have a mandate from the COO or the CEO and say, tomorrow we're putting this system in. You got to help show how this is going to help the salespeople make more commissions. By putting it in the system, you get the ability for the sales manager now to do some more analytics to help direct the salespeople and look at it globally, so that if one person is successful penetrating a new segment that they weren't in before, they can now see this as a company and recommend to the other salespeople, hey, why don't you tackle this segment in addition to what you were doing, in the segments that you were looking at. It also helps refine the analytics for, like, the president of the company. In many cases, we talk about how it's going to help the individual people, but in many cases, I look at some of these things as how it's going to help the company. And when it helps the company, then it helps all the people keep their jobs. Sometimes people don't
Agreed.
look at it as saying, okay, I want to be successful, but if they're successful, it means the company's successful, and now all boats rise, with the
Right.
rising tide.
Right. As opposed to holding that information close to the vest and wondering why the company's spiraling. And then we see tens of thousands of layoffs across the country. But that's really kind of that's going from here to there. But I understand your
Right,
point.
exactly. Yeah.
So along those same lines, and kind of evolving into our second topic there. So when you see those types of companies, I'm going to guess, even though you said oftentimes that can be more mature companies, here in South Florida, certainly we have a ton, literally thousands of SMBs, small and medium-sized businesses. And I'm sure you see that very often in those as well. And part of your work as a fractional / interim CIO is to kind of help go in and fix some of that stuff as well. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, for a lot of the smaller companies, you have a on-prem person who is an expert in their business, who knows whatever the product is, who knows whatever the service is that they're providing. But that doesn't mean that they know about the back office. And in many cases, they've never thought about it because they're wearing every hat in the company, and therefore they only have to communicate with themselves. Now, as the company starts to grow, it's like, okay, how do I take off this hat and give it to a sales manager? How do I take off this hat, give it to a finance person, and still have the communication? So communication and transparency among the core team is very important. And in a startup or a small business, many times people don't have the time to have, sit down in half-day meetings to catch up on everything. So you want to make sure that the data, in their specific realm as appropriate is available to the other people, so that you can look at it and say, okay, I just saw that we're on a 10-week hold on the supply chain item. Well, maybe I should give a warning to my customers before they get upset and, I don't deliver it next week. Or, and supply chain has been an area, that we're all familiar with the problems lately,
Sure.
and at the same time, you look at it and say, or if there's a supply chain problem, maybe I go into my system and say, maybe there's a different service or different product I can offer to them in the interim that will make them happy and give me the ability to wait on my supply chain before it gets fixed. You know, and we look at this and say, okay, is a Excel spreadsheet the right thing to use? Or is a Google sheet, for those people on the other side, is Gmail the right thing? And in some cases, the answer is still yes. But as the company grows, it becomes no more often than yes.
Okay. So what are other things that you do or that you advise? And again, feel free to kind of blend this, because the second topic we were talking about was not just your fractional CIO stuff, but even what you're doing as kind of a board member or an advisor to some of these companies. Again, can you kind of speak to that? If you're sitting on the board of a particular company, are you kind of advising them as if you were their CIO, whether or not they have one?
Yes, yes. And it's all very interrelated.
Okay.
The idea of people that are experts in their field, when they call us in, it's because we're experts in the business of business.
Right.
And I may not know that exact medical product or how it actually works that the company is selling, or what the exact recipe of that donut is, in the bakery, even though it's delicious when I eat it. But
Donuts.
but at the same time, helping them do the right type of back office analysis, look at setting up a costing system, where before they were just doing everything on the back of a napkin.
Right.
figuring out what they need to do to position themselves to grow. Many times they get a new order in, and I'm sure people have seen it on the TV shows with all these things of, hey, I got the new order, but I don't have any capacity to build the order. It's
Right.
like, let's start looking at the scenarios that are necessary for scaling. Let's ask some of the tough questions about what we need to do to be successful. And then at the same time, let's start looking at security. Um, a
Right.
lot of companies think I'm too small,
Hmm.
but what's happened is many companies that are small are really just the practice realms for the hackers to practice on to see,
Good point.
well, let me turn on something simple, and build my
Right.
confidence. And let me see if I can get ransomware on this little ABC company, and maybe they'll give me $1,000 or $10,000 before I start for the $1 million strikes.
That's a great example. Um, that couldn't be a more perfect example. And I'm guessing you see that in your work with startups as well, is that there's that mentality of, I don't need to worry about that. I don't need cyber insurance, or I don't need cybersecurity. Go ahead, I'll let you go on that
Right.
because I was going to make a
Yeah.
comment. But
In fact, I was working with a candy company. Candy companies are the happiest people in the world.
sure.
If you're going to be a candy. And when Ferrero Rocher got hacked, I got this call saying, well, if they can be hacked, what about us? And this was a company that, hardly had any password security, didn't use multi-factor, didn't do anything because they said, we're a candy company. Who would ever want to hurt us? You know?
Right.
And by the time we were done, we had something that would just help them sleep at night. I mean, that's the goal with security is we know we're never going to make it 100% secure.
Right.
And for some companies, you don't even want to try because you want to have other methodologies in place, which is why, you know, people need to test their backups. There's been so many times I've come into
Great.
companies that say we're backing up and, well, when was the last time you tried to restore something? It's like, oh, well, we backed it up. Isn't that good enough? And it's like, you try to restore and you find out that, you know, it's going to take them, X number of hours to restore because they've been just doing incrementals since 1960. And, it's like, well,
Yep.
how much you didn't do a full backup at any point in time, and it's like, and so we have to, add a little common sense on the technology common sense side of asking the key questions.
Absolutely. And I think one of the comments I often make when I'm working with those same types of companies, and, I talk about it because a former boss of mine used to say this, and while I don't totally agree with the statement, it is true, and it kind of makes an impact when you're speaking to some of these SMBs. I say there's two types of companies: technology companies and companies that don't know they're a technology company.
Right.
Because everybody's a technology company. I don't care if you're a mom and pop, bodega or deli on the corner, or a little gas station, 7-Eleven. You have a point of sale system. You have something that's keeping track of your financials. You probably have a physical cameras, video surveillance system. You have all kinds of technology surrounding you that if you didn't, or if your credit card machine went down, you'd be in a world of hurt. You might have to close your store, at least temporarily, if not, permanently. And that technology, and I use the credit card example to kind of
Right.
parallel what you were just saying from a security standpoint, to say, hoping that it's just a credit card terminal at a mom and pop store, that they're not actually storing any of that data. But have maybe you found situations where something that small and innocent actually is a problem?
There's many times that people just have their own little PC where they're keeping all of their correspondence, all of their records, everything else, because they really haven't ever thought about backing up, you know, and then they get a new PC, and the old PC is wherever it happens to be, and they've lost everything, because they haven't transferred any of their data. That is the area that I find the biggest area of concern. A lot of people are now, moving to, just the cloud
Right.
and putting everything in the cloud. But sometimes a switch gets set on a machine, and all of a sudden they're now storing everything locally and not in the cloud, and they don't even know it. You know, and so while the cloud is wonderful, it's kind of like the discussion we had earlier of if you're just doing things by muscle memory and not
Right.
knowing exactly what you're doing, sometimes when something changes, you're not even aware of it or able to cope with the change. And so we have, in many cases, evolved from a society that's become digitally integrated to a society that's digitally dependent. And that's something that we have to help train on, help them with the change management, help them with the learning to understand what they're doing so that they understand what their own risks are, and they can adjust those based on their own level of tolerance to those risks.
So how do you, so that's an interesting segue. How do you get access to those small and medium-sized businesses, through your company, through Taffet Associates, to make these folks, these small businesses, even aware that it's something they should be concerned about? And then kind of the follow-up to that is, oftentimes I know I've heard in my cases where I'll get the feedback, I can't afford that right now. And again, I already know what your answer is going to be to that, but so first of all, how do you get access, and how do you explain to those small businesses, and then how do you react when they say, yeah, can't really, good idea, can't do it right now?
Well, I get access to them in three ways. One is I have a very active LinkedIn presence,
Okay.
and so people sometimes just approach me, having seen something that I posted on LinkedIn. I'm also associated with the CIO Council, and we, produce events on a regular basis that attract people. And the last thing is just general networking of knowing people here in the South Florida area. And, then they move. So I know people all over the world,
Right.
and they come back and say, oh, yeah, I remember, Greg can help you with this, and that's basically how I even got us started, is because when I was the CIO of US Gas and Electric and the company got bought out, and I was looking at what am I going to do next? People just started coming up to me and saying, Greg, can you help me? And the answer was, aha, that's what I'm
Sure.
going to do.
Yeah.
I'll just start helping people, and
Right.
it's been very rewarding to do that.
Great. So if those small businesses come to you and say, like I said, hey, I can't afford that right now, I hear what you're saying, but from a risk tolerance perspective, I don't think it's a risk for me. And again, you don't want to scare them, but at the same time, they need a little bit of that dose of reality. How do you convey that to them?
Well, that's actually bringing up real world examples, like with the candy company when Ferrero Rocher got hacked.
Right.
Um, you know, and then in another case, I had a company where their internet went down completely, and nobody could figure it out. All the equipment looked like it was working, and we found that they ran their wire for their internet on the outside of their building, and it was behind some bushes, and one of those bushes was a cactus. And over the years, the cactus grew, and in the wind, the cactus swayed back and forth, and the sharp little needle on the cactus finally, after a couple of years, cut the wire. And
Hilarious.
so while it may be a oversimplification, they saved a little bit of money on not putting the cable in conduit, but
Right.
now, all their cable is in conduit, you know?
And for everybody listening that says, oh, I would never do that,
Yeah.
that is a perfect example. Right? That is a perfect example.
you just look at where you've saved the money and decide, is it something, that I can, tolerate? How often are you going to check your backups and restores? How often are you going to update your cybersecurity insurance? And that's another area that I'm starting to get more and more involved with, is helping people determine what the right level of cyber insurance they should get.
Right.
And more companies are offering cyber insurance these days.
Sure.
So it's not just like, who's the only one who will insure me? Just about a handful of companies are out there now, and they all have now oversight requirements to keep your cyber insurance.
Right. Yeah, I am trying to find, I recently went to a presentation here. I think you might have been at the same one, at a local law firm that had an entire presentation on cyber insurance and risk. And there were more lawyers and insurance people in the room than there were IT people, which was a fascinating thing. And one of my future podcasts, I want to get some of those folks on here to talk more about exactly that topic. But you mentioned something earlier that's kind of, again, a good segue into our next topic, which is, you mentioned the CIO Council, which, for those who don't know, it's a volunteer organization down here in South Florida, comprised mainly of senior IT executives, not just CIOs, but a lot of senior IT folks. And they have a great mission. The money that they raise goes to scholarships for high school students that are pursuing STEM degrees. But can you talk a little bit more about your role with the CIO Council, and maybe a little bit more about it for those who might want to get interested or involved?
Right. So I have been on the CIO Council for close to 10 years now. And my current role there is on the executive board and the chairman of the events committee. So as a plug for our May 25th event on AR and VR and XR, if you're free on May 25th, please go to the CIO Council website and sign up. But we try to have 2 or 3 real core goals. One is to actually have our scholarship fund. So since everybody is a volunteer at the CIO Council, we have given out over 80 scholarships over the last bunch of years to students in Miami, Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach counties. So every year our scholarship committee gets inundated by really good students who are looking for and need some extra help, in the monetary sense to get there. And, we have been very happy to provide that. The second thing is, actually, we have some events. We have our State of the CIO event in March, which is a huge event. We get, people from all over the 3 counties. And we have our golf event, which is more for networking and having fun, with your peers. But then, we have a bunch of roundtables during the year on events that people say are key topics for them. So that's the second. And the third is just for networking, to meet your peers. And when you have a problem, it's great to be able to talk to somebody who may have already solved that problem,
Yep.
And
Yep.
that's, I think we don't talk enough about how it's, I can talk with you and say, Dale, have you ever seen this problem before? And if you have, to help me solve it, is a wonderful thing, because now, I can, go back and have not a guess as to how to solve the problem, if I haven't done it before, but I know that this has worked in a way that will help the client,
Yep.
and in many cases, we just talk at these events and find out what everybody is doing and find out what's hot and what's not, and what the problems are. So I really enjoy chatting with you and the other guys on the team, and
Right.
other people, not just guys.
Right.
And, so it's a very good way to keep up Yeah, you have to read the journals and the podcasts and everything
Right.
else.
Right.
But sometimes some things are a little bit more enjoyable to do to keep up than just sitting in front of your screen all day.
Right. Yeah. It's better to do it in person. God knows we missed that for 2+ years.
Mhm.
And there's an interesting topic, and I want to assuage any non-IT people that are listening to this conversation right now, because when you first started to say that, I had bells in my head go off from previous folks that I've worked with that say, you mean you IT guys are getting together and sharing company secrets about, X company versus Y company? And what you said was spot on to say, no, that's not what we're doing. We're just saying, I have a unique situation or I have a problem that I'm dealing with. Hey, Greg or David or any of our other associates, have you ever run into this? And what I often explain to other C-level executives is, it's something I'm getting more passionate about lately because I'm seeing more and more cases of it. And I'd be curious as to you too, is what most companies don't understand. I made the comment earlier, you're either a tech company or you don't know you're a tech company. Similarly, I don't care whether you're in the cruise line business or the manufacturing business or the chocolate business, 90% of everything you do, technologically speaking, is exactly the same as any of those other examples I just used. Whether you're making chocolate or you're a cruise line, 90% of your tech is exactly the same. There's 10% maybe that differentiates you as a chocolate manufacturer versus you as a cruise line. But it's less than a lot of people think. And I'm actually coming up with a lecture right now that's entitled, You're Not That Special. uh,
Well, that's the whole thing, is the quality of the product is more the differentiator than the technology of the systems behind the product. So
very
if I go out
deep.
and execute on my strategy better than you, I may be using exactly the same, CRM system. Or how many companies in the world all use Microsoft Dynamics or SAP? They're all
Oracle. Yep,
using the same system,
that's
and
correct.
they have it slightly different, or they have a couple of extra fields here or there.
Right.
But it's the same technology. And if I learn how to do that little extra report, that you did for your team, the data is completely proprietary and off the table. We don't ever
Right.
talk about that.
Right.
But, how did you solve this problem?
Right.
What software did you use?
Right.
Even sometimes at the very beginning, it's like, hey, I'm dealing with this, very niche type, let's say printing company. Have you dealt with a printing company, and what printing company software have you used?
Right.
And it helps find the good players, rise to the top very quickly that way.
Yeah, no, great example. Great example. So I think we're kind of moving into one of our last topics here. And this is kind of the personal and the passionate side. And I love this aspect. You're one of the first people that I'm going to kind of deep dive into this with it, kind of a way to round out or end some of my podcasts. But I just love this area that you're involved with, coral reef restoration and the blue economy. Can you explain to folks what is the blue economy, and maybe a little bit more about what you're doing as far as coral reefs and why it's important?
Sure. And let me change my background first.
Oh,
Um,
that's the one I'm used to seeing when I talk to Greg.
so when I talk about the blue economy, everybody is pretty familiar with the green economy.
Right.
That's everything in the environment. Well, the blue economy, as my blue background is everything that's just part of the ocean. So from all of the marine fisheries to the mangroves to the seagrasses to the coral reefs, to shipping and getting rid of all the plastic in the ocean. Those are things in the blue economy. The area that I am working in is on coral reef restoration. And each one of those little trees that you see there holds about 60 little baby corals that are about this big. And because they're in the ocean and they're babies, they grow much faster than the old coral reefs. Here in South Florida, we are all built on the top of a 1,000,000-year-old coral reef. And when I get to be 1,000,000 years old, I'm probably going to grow very slowly also. But these little babies think that they're little babies, and they grow very, very fast. It's not something that we're doing. It's just normal Mother Nature. And when they get to be about this size, we take them off of these trees and then reattach them back onto areas where the coral reef, has not been faring so well. And they still think of themselves as little baby corals, and they still continue to grow, much, much faster than, the old coral reef was growing. And it helps to restore the balance of nature, that the coral reefs protect us from storms, and the wave surges and all that. They're an environment that helps, little fish and little marine animals, to hide while they're still small, and they're food for the bigger animals. And it also helps that people don't realize that 2 out of 3 of the breaths that you take come from coral reefs, and only 1 out of 3 comes from the vegetation on land. So it's very important that, we have these coral reefs to continue to produce oxygen.
I was hoping you were going to throw that stat out. Otherwise, I was going to prompt you.
Yeah. And, countries all over the world are now doing this. This nursery is about 5 miles off of Key Largo, down in the Florida Keys. It's one of the bigger ones. It covers over 5 acres. But it's something that people all over the world are, doing. And, I'm very happy to be part of it, to actually be out there doing something.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in that particular picture, and we've never discussed it. Like I said, I'm always just used to seeing it as your background when we chat. That doesn't even look that deep.
No, no. The whole nursery the sand is about 30 feet.
Okay.
And so the corals are, in the summertime, the water is a little warmer, so we keep them a little closer so they get a little bit more sun. In the wintertime, these are ropes that these plastic trees are attached to, so we can actually lower them a little bit so that they're, in a little bit warmer water, a little bit more protected. And the depth there, is 10 to 25 feet, that the corals are in.
Okay.
So when you go down there, on a scuba tank, you're down there for a long time.
Right.
You come back up when you're a prune. It's
Right.
all the oils leave your body, and you just come back up and you say, "Whoo." So
Well, and it's important to restore the reefs. And again, it might be obvious to some people, but just to state the obvious, why are the coral reefs getting so destroyed?
the coral reefs are being affected by the temperature. As the oceans are a little bit warmer now, the corals are very sensitive to that, and they're dying off.
Wow.
And it again is an amazing part of Mother Nature that the new baby corals are, a little bit better at resisting it than the old ones. They're growing and thriving, and people all over the world are using these sort of techniques and variations on these to, restart, a lot of the coral reefs.
Nice, nice. Well, thank you for doing that. I appreciate your help in helping restore the coral reefs. I love the fact that, again, people always assume, Earth Day, we're planting trees, the Amazon, the rainforest. If we don't have these trees, we won't be able to breathe. I love that fact that, that factoid that you threw out there that, coral reefs are actually more important for the breathable air that we have than the trees. So great. And again, thank you for doing that.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Anything else you want to tell our audience before we wrap up?
I just, want to tell people that, technology is changing, and in my mind, it's getting more complex. There's more options, there's more choices, there's more ways to do things than ever before. And therefore, as they start looking at, what technology they should use, they have a big choice out there in the marketplace, and it may be very confusing, especially if they're doing this for the first time and don't know all the questions to ask, and that's where people like you and me come in to help them know what the right questions for their business are so that they can pick the right technology, the right processes, and use them with the right people.
That's a great way to end that. Thank you, Greg. And if folks want, thank you. I was just going to ask you to do that. If people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
My email is greg@taffet.org. Very easy since my name is Greg Taffet, and my phone number is right there, and my website is www.taffet.org.
Excellent. Well, thank you again so much for being a guest on my podcast today, Greg. I'm going to flip over to my outro slide here. And again, folks, my name is Dale Bondanza. My company is DAB Enterprises, LLC. I look forward to speaking to you again, Greg, soon. And as far as the audience is concerned, thank you for joining me today. And if you need anything that DABEL can help with, just give us a call. A little dab will do you. Thank you all and have a great day.
Take care now. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Greg.